One officer, tied, bruised, left beneath a frozen bridge with no way out. No radio, no backup. Just the sound of wind and the slow ache of winter. And yet someone came. Not in uniform. Not on two legs. A retired K9 German Shepherd, once trained to obey, now following only instinct and loyalty. What happened next will make you cry and remind you why dogs never give up on us, even when we've been forgotten. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe in second chances and heroic dogs, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss another story like this. Now sit back, breathe deep, and let this story carry you into the cold, where warmth was found in the most unexpected place. The night air in Ash Hollow carried the sharp scent of pine needles and snow, curling in gusts down the frozen hillsides like breath from some sleeping beast. It was early January in the Colorado Highlands, and winter had wrapped the small mountain town in a hushed, unforgiving silence. The stars overhead glinted faintly through heavy clouds, and the moon cast only a dim silver wash across the blanketed land. At the edge of the forest, in a cabin built from rough-hewn logs, an old man sat by the fire, a thick wool blanket across his lap and a steaming mug of tea forgotten on the table beside him. Earl Whitmore, 72, weathered and quiet, was the kind of man who'd always found more comfort in the company of trees than people. Once a respected park ranger with decades of service behind him, Earl had retired into solitude after the passing of his wife 5 winters ago. His beard had gone white, his knees stiffened with age, but his mind remained sharp, especially when it came to the woods. Beside him, lying with his head across the braided rug, was Shadow, a 7-year-old German Shepherd with a sable coat, amber eyes, and a scar down his left shoulder from an old battlefield injury. Once a proud K9 unit deployed along the southern border, Shadow had served with quiet precision until an explosion left him with a damaged leg and a soul that struggled to settle. Earl had adopted him from the force, and since then the two had formed an unspoken bond built on shared silence and mutual respect. That night, however, something had changed. Shadow stirred from his place by the fire, lifting his head as if some distant signal had reached him. His ears pricked, muscles tightening beneath his thick winter coat. He stood, moved to the door, and let out a low, impatient whine. "What is it, boy?" Earl murmured, setting his mug down. He stood and walked over slowly, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. But before he could lift the latch, Shadow leapt forward and nudged it with his snout, pushing it open just enough to slide through. "Shadow!" Earl called after him, but the dog was already a dark blur vanishing into the snow-glow woods. Outside, the wind pulled at the trees and danced across the icy surface of the old trails. Shadow's paws crunched through hardened drifts as he moved swiftly, guided by something deeper than sight or smell, something instinctual, bone deep. A mile from the cabin, beyond a thicket of frost-covered pines, stood the Iron Cap Bridge. Once a vital crossing for logging trucks and fire crews, it had long since fallen into disrepair. Rusted beams reached out over a narrow ravine where the creek below had dried to a bed of ice-flecked mud and scattered stone. The bridge groaned in the cold as the wind swept through its skeletal structure. Shadow reached the clearing and stopped. The silence here was heavier, a kind of stillness that carried weight. His breath steamed into the dark. Then he heard it, a sound beneath the wind. Faint, human. A groan. His head snapped toward the source. Eyes locked, ears forward. It was coming from beneath the bridge. Across town, just beyond the glowing windows of the Ash Hollow Diner, a different kind of silence had taken hold. Inside the small wood-paneled police station that sat near the roundabout, the mood was taut with unease. A phone buzzed unanswered on the corner desk. Deputy Megan Harris, 31, with a tidy ponytail and a reputation for blunt honesty, stood leaning over a map with one gloved finger tracing a line along the border roads. "He should have checked in by now," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. She was talking about Noah Carter, a young officer only recently assigned to narcotics surveillance in the mountainous region. Noah was 28, clean-shaven with windswept chestnut hair and a crooked smile that came too easily. He had grown up one town over and had joined the force out of a mix of principle and stubbornness. He'd been tracking whispers of a drug ring operating in the past nothing solid yet, just a string of sightings and strange tire tracks. His last message had come in 2 nights ago. And then nothing. Sheriff Clay Dobson, a broad man in his early 60s with a gut built on diner biscuits and coffee, sat behind the desk chewing the cap of a pen. "It's probably nothing," he muttered. "Snow might have cut the signal. Or he went too far into the canyons." Megan shot him a sharp glance. "He never misses check-in, Clay. He's green, yeah, but not sloppy." Clay exhaled through his nose and rubbed his eyes. "All right. We'll ping his last known location again. Maybe he just got stuck." But there was a tremble in his voice. The kind that came from experience. The kind that had learned not to ignore silences like this. Outside, the street lamps flickered as the wind began to pick up again, whistling through the gaps in windows, stirring leaves frozen stiff against the curb. The storm was moving in, and somewhere out there, beneath the old bridge of Iron Cap Ridge, someone wasn't answering. The snow along the ravine had stopped falling, but the cold deepened in its place, curling in waves beneath the iron bridge like a ghost that had forgotten how to speak. It was here, in the bitter hollow under the decaying span, that Shadow stood rigid, his paws sunk into the icy mud, breath steaming in quick bursts. His amber eyes scanned the darkness beneath the bridge's girders where the faint whimpering sound had drawn him. A broken shape lay sprawled near the base of a collapsed rock outcrop barely visible in the shadows, barely breathing. Shadow moved forward, cautious yet determined. His instincts had not failed him. As he approached, the form became clearer. A man, tied. His wrists bound tightly behind his back, thick nylon cord cutting deep into raw skin. His ankles were knotted as well, legs twisted beneath him. A strip of dirty cloth had been shoved into his mouth and fastened around his head. His dark patrol jacket was torn open at the shoulder, exposing skin mottled with bruises and flecks of dried blood. The man's face was pale and swollen, one eye nearly closed from a blow. A faint exhale of frost escaped his lips, just enough to prove he was alive. But not for long, not in this cold. It was Noah Carter. Shadow crept closer, his snout brushing the young officer's cheek. The human scent was unmistakable familiar, layered with pain and exhaustion. The dog let out a low whine, then began licking at the side of Noah's face, clearing a patch of frozen blood and stirring the man's consciousness. Noah stirred faintly, his eyelids twitching. The sensation was like drifting toward the surface of a frozen lake. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, but he felt warmth at his side. A breath, a heartbeat. Then the bark. Shadow stepped back and let out a short, sharp bark that rang against the metal beams above. No answer. He barked again, louder, longer, a cry sent into the void. Still nothing but the silence of trees and the distant creak of wind through rusted cables. But Shadow wouldn't stop. Again, he barked, pacing in tight circles around Noah's body, tail stiff, posture alert. He pawed at the frozen mud, trying to dig beneath Noah's arm, to stir him, to move him, anything. The man groaned again, barely audible, but it was something. His lips trembled around the cloth gag, his chest rising in thin, ragged pulls of air. Shadow whimpered and lay down beside him, pressing his body against Noah's to share warmth. His breath steamed against the young man's jaw, and he licked again, gently, persistently. Then he barked once more, sharp and deliberate, his voice echoing outward toward the snow-draped trees beyond the ridge. Far from the ravine, back near the forest edge, Earl Whitmore stood on the porch with a flashlight in one hand and Shadow's leash in the other. His boots were half buried in the snow that had fallen since the dog's disappearance. The old man's beard was white with frost, his breath puffing from between tight lips. "Damn dog," he muttered, worry deep in his chest. "Where'd you run off to?" He hadn't heard a single sound since Shadow bolted through the trees over an hour ago. He'd walked to the wood line and back twice, scanning for paw prints, for any sign. But with the snow packing fresh layers over the trail, it was useless now. Earl's knuckles whitened around the flashlight. Something wasn't right. He knew that much. He trudged back inside, shedding snow from his jacket, and picked up the old landline on the kitchen wall. He turned the rotary dial slowly and deliberately. It rang twice before being picked up. "Clara," he said simply. On the other end of the line, Clara Monroe sat at her desk surrounded by veterinary textbooks, thermal wraps, and a sleepy Australian shepherd curled at her feet. Clara was in her late 60s, with sharp gray eyes and a spine as straight as a flagpole. Once a combat medic with the Air Force, she'd spent her post-military years rescuing and rehabilitating injured dogs, especially those cast aside after service. A training accident years ago had taken her favorite partner, and though she never spoke of it, she carried the loss quietly, like a second name. She sat up straighter at Earl's voice. "It's late. What's wrong?" "It's Shadow," he said. Took off toward Ironcap. Wouldn't stop, wouldn't listen. "Something's got him riled." Clara's tone shifted instantly. "How long ago?" "Hour and change." "Maybe more. You check the bridge?" "I can't make it down the ridge in this snow." "I'll meet you at the trailhead in 20, she said. "Bring rope and your flare. If that dog's sounding alarms, someone needs saving." She hung up before Earl could reply. Moments later, she was dressed in a waterproof parka, headlamp slung over her neck, and her backpack filled with first aid kits and emergency blankets. The Aussie at her feet let out a soft whine. "Not this time, Buck," she said, giving the dog a pat. "This one's for Shadow." Back beneath the bridge, Shadow hadn't stopped barking. Every few minutes he paused to lick Noah's cheek or paw at the ropes binding him, but his strength alone couldn't cut them. The cold had thickened, settling like a weight across Noah's chest. His breath was a whisper now. His eyes flickered open once more, glazed and unfocused, locking briefly on the shape beside him. For a moment he didn't recognize the dog, but then the name came, unspoken but present. Shadow. Then darkness again. But Shadow stayed. The hours crawled like shadows under moonlight. Snow fell in slow, tired sheets over the ravine, blanketing the frozen earth, the rusted steel girders, and the bruised body of the young man lying broken below. Noah Carter's breathing had grown faint, the shallow rise and fall of his chest more suggestion than certainty. Frost clung to his eyebrows and his lips had turned pale blue. Death, silent and patient, waited just beneath the surface of his skin. But Shadow did not yield. The old K9's sable coat was dusted white from falling snow, his body curled tightly around Noah's side. Heat, sparse as it was, passed between them like an ember fighting wind. Every so often, Shadow rose to lick the officer's cheek or nudge his shoulder with his nose, as if to remind Noah and himself that this was not the end. At one point, Noah stirred. Barely. His eyes twitched beneath closed lids, a soft sound escaping his throat. Not a word, but a breath tangled in memory. The world around him was haze and pain, but something warm pressed against his ribs. Not steel, not cold, not cruelty. Something living. A heartbeat beside his own. His fingers, numb and bound, twitched slightly in the snow. Shadow saw it and let out a whimper that ended in a soft growl. Not of fear, but urgency. Then he acted. The ropes around Noah's wrists were thick and nylon tight, but frost had begun to crust around the knots. Shadow leaned in and began gnawing, gently at first, then with determination. His teeth scraped against the cord, slowly shredding the outer layer. Minutes passed. Maybe more. The snow thickened and the light from the moon vanished behind clouds. But Shadow didn't stop. Eventually, one strand snapped, then another. The rope around Noah's wrists loosened just enough for blood to begin moving again. Slow, painful circulation that sparked a deeper moan from his throat. Shadow licked the skin where the cord had dug in, nudging the officer's hands beneath his chest. He moved next to the ankle bindings, tugging, digging his paws under the knot with enough force to loosen them slightly. He couldn't undo it completely, but it was enough. Noah now lay not like a discarded object, but like a man who might be pulled back from the edge. Still, the cold was eating away at time. Shadow needed help. He stood, gave Noah one last nudge, then turned toward the ravine wall. The snow was deep and the slope slick with ice, but he had climbed worse. He'd been trained in terrains like this: mountains, ruins, wilderness. His paws found steady purchase as he scrambled upward, shoulders low, head down against the wind. By the time Shadow reached the top of the ravine, the storm had lessened, but the temperature had dropped further. The trees stood like frozen sentries, still and watching. The old K9 paused, sniffed the air, and began running. He didn't head home. He went north toward the Old Mill Ranger Station, a small structure long since retired by the Forestry Service but still used in emergencies. It had once been Shadow's training ground, where handlers taught him to detect survivors during avalanche drills and identify distress scents in remote regions. He remembered the terrain not as memory, but as instinct. The station was a squat building of timber and stone, roof blanketed with snow, windows boarded up. But Shadow wasn't after shelter. He made his way to the rear, where beneath an old wooden overhang sat a rusted metal box locked by pad and chain. Inside was an emergency transceiver, an old shortwave radio linked to the region's volunteer search network. It hadn't been used in years, but someone else was listening. Several miles east, inside a cluttered A-frame cabin filled with emergency supplies, blankets, and old maps, Clara Monroe sat beside a battery-powered receiver. She had tuned it out of habit, listening to static between waves while Earl dressed in layers beside her. Her fingers, knotted with age but steady, tapped the dial. Then she froze. "Stop," she said sharply. Earl looked up, puzzled. She raised the volume. A sound, faint but distinct, filtered through the static. Barking, repeating. Rhythmic, long pauses. Then again, one bark, then two short. Then silence, then again. Clara's eyes narrowed. "That's Shadow." "You sure?" Earl asked, stepping forward. "I trained that signal." Her voice was low, firm. "That's distress code. Shadow's marking coordinates. That dog found someone." Earl's expression changed. He pulled his gloves tight. "Let's go." "I'm calling it in first." Clara grabbed a pen and scribbled down the timing of the barks, translating it to grid coordinates by memory. "They're by the ravine." "He's trying to lead us back." Earl, now fully suited in his old Ranger gear dark green coat, patched at the elbows, boots cracked but still good knotted. "I'll bring the thermal blankets." "Bring two," Clara said. "If he's alive, he's on the edge." Outside, the cold waited for them. But so did Shadow. The snowfall had eased into a soft, steady drift, coating the forest floor in a fresh layer of powder. Each flake landed without sound, like secrets whispered to the earth. In the darkness before dawn, the only lights came from headlamps, two beams cutting through the thick of trees, sweeping slowly across bark and brush. Clara Monroe led the way, her boots crunching in the snow with determined rhythm. Her breath fogged in the air, but she moved with the sure-footed grace of someone trained for emergencies. She wore a heavy-duty parka, olive green with a bright red emergency cross stitched on the sleeve. A thick scarf wrapped around her neck, and her gray hair peeked out from beneath a knitted cap. Her face, lined and calm, reflected both urgency and experience. Every few yards she paused to scan the ground, noting the depth and spread of the paw prints ahead. Behind her came Earl Whitmore, bundled in his old ranger coat, breathing hard but keeping pace. He held a lantern in one hand, casting flickering gold against the white terrain. The cold gnawed at his joints, but he pressed on. "There," Clara said suddenly, pointing. "Look at the gate spacing. That's Shadow's stride." "You're sure he came this way?" Earl asked, leaning in to inspect the snow. Clara nodded. "He's trained to double back when he finds someone in distress. He wouldn't leave without a reason." The tracks wove between the trees, then turned sharply, heading downhill toward a narrow ridge. Beyond that ridge, barely visible in the moonlight, loomed the rusted outline of Iron Cap Bridge. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "He brought us back," she murmured. They picked up speed, sliding carefully down the slope. The snow here had thinned, revealing hardened patches of dirt and exposed rock. As they neared the bridge, Clara held up a hand. "Wait," she said. In the half-light, they saw it. A set of deep paw prints circling a depression in the snow, then pressed tightly beside it, like the dog had laid down and stayed. Then a human form. Clara moved first, rushing toward the dark shape near the base of the bridge. "Oh my God," she breathed. She dropped to her knees beside him. "It's Noah." Noah Carter lay in the mud and frost, his body twisted and bound, though the cords had partially loosened at the wrists. His lips were cracked, his skin pale and icy. But his chest rose and fell, slowly, painfully. And across his chest, curled tightly to conserve warmth, was Shadow. The dog didn't move as Clara approached. He lifted his head just slightly, eyes glassy but alert, then rested his muzzle again against Noah's arm as if to say, "I stayed." Clara's training kicked in. She pulled off her gloves and quickly assessed Noah's pulse weak but present. She checked his pupils, pressed fingers to his neck, whispered reassurances into the cold air. "Earl, bring the med kit," she shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. Earl dropped beside her moments later, pulling open the kit and passing out foil blankets and sterile gauze. Clara worked efficiently, wrapping Noah's torso, tucking thermal packs beneath his arms, gently lifting his head onto a bundled jacket. She cut away part of the gag, letting Noah's head tilt back just enough for clearer breathing. Shadow didn't move until Clara spoke directly to him. "Good boy," she whispered, brushing snow from his back. "You did everything right." She reached for the portable radio clipped to her shoulder and switched to the emergency frequency. "Dispatch, this is Clara Monroe. I have one officer down, hypothermic and injured, location Iron Cap Bridge North Ravine. Request immediate medevac and snowmobile access. Repeat, urgent medical needed." There was a moment of static, then a male voice crackled through. "Copy that, Clara. Rescue unit en route. ETA 25 minutes. Clara exhaled deeply, her fingers trembling slightly as she wrapped Noah's wrists in insulating bandage. "We've got him, Earl," she said, "but we need to keep him warm." Earl nodded, settling beside Noah and placing a blanket around Shadow as well. "This dog, he saved his life." "He bought him time," Clara replied, "and in this cold, time is everything." As they waited for the rescue team, Earl stood to scan the surrounding area. The snow caught something along the tree-line ruts barely visible. He squinted. "Clara," he said, pointing. "You see that? Tire tracks, fresh." Clara turned, narrowed her eyes. The tracks were wide set, from heavy-duty treads likely from a truck or modified SUV. They cut across the snow and disappeared toward the service trail east of the bridge. "Someone came through here recently," she said, "and not on foot." "Think it's connected?" Earl asked, voice low. Clara gave a grim nod. "We're less than 2 miles from the old quarry road. Wasn't that part of Noah's investigation?" "Yeah," Earl said, "drug routes." "Smuggling runs." Clara pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the tire patterns before the snow erased them. "I'm reporting this to the sheriff. They need to secure this area. Someone left Noah here, and they didn't just disappear." Shadow stirred beside her, resting his head across Noah's legs. Above them, the wind picked up again, and in the distance, a faint roar of engines echoed through the trees. Rescue was coming. But for now, under the silence of snow and the weight of their breaths, the only thing that mattered was that he was still alive. Noah Carter lay motionless beneath sterile lights, a tangle of IV lines in both arms, oxygen tubes fluttering faintly with each breath. The emergency room at Pine Ridge Medical Center was quiet but tense, its staff moving in the efficient silence that only seasoned trauma teams knew. His face was pale, his lips still cracked from exposure, but there was color returning. Slowly, like sunrise after too long a night. By his bedside, Clara Monroe sat upright in a plastic chair, watching the monitors with a calm, clinical focus. She hadn't changed out of her rescue gear, though her gloves had long since dried on the radiator beside her. Earl stood at the window, arms crossed over his chest, eyes on the distant mountains now shrouded in mist. It had been only hours since they pulled Noah from beneath the bridge. A medevac team had arrived just in time, 2 EMTs on snowmobiles and a backboard stretcher that crunched across frostbitten roots. Now, the young officer was stable, though still not fully conscious. Shadow lay curled beneath the bench, unmoving but alert. His coat had dried, his breathing slow, though every so often his ears twitched at the slightest beep from the monitors above Noah's head. The door creaked open, and in stepped Dr. Lena Portman, the trauma specialist on duty. Mid-40s, sharp-featured and composed, Dr. Portman wore her dark brown hair in a tight braid and her expression in a tighter line. She was known in the region as someone who didn't waste words and rarely smiled, but no one ever doubted her ability. "He's stable," she said, glancing at Clara. "Internal hypothermia managed. We're monitoring for brain swelling, but so far, he's holding." Clara nodded. He was lucky. Dr. Portman gave a thin, tired smile. He had a guardian. As if hearing his cue, Shadow raised his head slightly and gave a soft grunt. His eyes met the doctor's briefly before returning to Noah. "Let us know if he stirs," the doctor added. "He's got something to say, I'd wager." It was nearly dawn when Noah's eyelids fluttered. Clara, already half asleep, snapped alert the moment she saw movement. She stood, leaning over him gently. "Noah," she said softly, "you're safe now. Just breathe." He blinked slowly, confusion swirling behind the green of his eyes. His voice, when it came, was a rasp barely above a whisper. "Boot. My boot." Clara furrowed her brow. "What about your boot?" He swallowed painfully. "Left heel. USB. It's in heel." She leaned closer. "You hid something." "Evidence," he choked out. "Drug route. Names. Before they took me." Clara turned sharply. "Earl." Earl was already halfway out the door. "I'll find it," he said. "Shadow knows the place." Clara looked down at the dog. "Shadow, you remember?" she asked quietly. Shadow rose slowly, his joints stiff from hours on the cold floor, but his eyes were clear. He moved toward Earl with deliberate purpose, tail low but steady. They arrived back at the ravine just after sunrise. The sky was a dull sheet of pewter, clouds dragging across the peaks. Snow had fallen again, erasing most signs of the chaos from the night before. But Shadow needed no map. He moved to the slope where Noah had been found and began to dig, his paws sending tufts of fresh powder flying. It took only minutes. From beneath a patch of churned-up snow and frost-muddied debris, Shadow tugged free a black tactical boot, its laces still tied, its leather stiff with cold. Earl took it gently and turned it over. The heel was worn, scuffed, but something was odd. Clara had joined them by then and immediately recognized the telltale outline. A compartment had been carved into the base. Earl used his multi-tool to pry it open. Inside was a tiny USB drive, wrapped in a scrap of waterproof foil. Clara's breath hitched. "Let's get this to the sheriff." By late afternoon, the contents of the drive had been decrypted and loaded into the police department's database. It was damning. Surveillance photos, payment ledgers, hidden GPS logs, and names, dozens of them linked to the Crimson Ridge smuggling ring. The network had been operating for nearly a year, using snow routes and abandoned ranger paths to ferry illegal substances across state lines. Sheriff Clay Dobson, balding and square-jawed with a voice like gravel, held the drive in his palm like it was gold. This is a kill shot," he said, eyes narrowing. "We have everything." Deputy Megan Harris, seated beside him with her brows furrowed, glanced at the map laid across the table. "The quarry hideout matches the GPS tags. They've been using the old blasting tunnels for months." "Get your team ready," Dobson said. "We move tonight." That night, beneath a black sky hung with stars too cold to blink, the Ash Hollow Police Department, backed by regional task forces, launched a multi-unit raid. Snowmobiles and SUVs rolled silent into the quarry basin. Armed officers breached the entrance to the underground lair just after midnight. They caught all 10 suspects alive. Among them was Dean Harker, a former logistics officer turned smuggler with a long scar across his jaw and a stare like empty glass. He'd once been a decorated mountain rescue volunteer. Now he was the architect of a criminal empire. With him were guns, cash, and enough narcotics to supply 5 counties. The Crimson Ridge operation fell in a single night, and it started with a message hidden in the mud. Ash Hollow, once a quiet, forgotten corner of Colorado, now seemed to be holding its breath. Snow still lined the rooftops of the old cabins, and the mountains around the town had been swallowed by fog. But inside, the warmth of the cabin where Noah had been recovering provided a sharp contrast to the chill of the world outside. The soft hum of the wood stove and the clinking of dishes created a strange sense of peace that hadn't been present in the town for a long while. Noah Carter had spent the past 2 weeks in bed, recovering from the physical toll the storm and his injuries had taken on him. His ribs were still bruised, his ankle twisted at an odd angle from the rope that had bound him. But the fever had finally broken, and he was slowly regaining his strength. Each day, he felt a little more like himself and a little more at home in Ash Hollow, though he hadn't fully accepted that yet. He hadn't wanted to go back to the city. There was nothing for him there but the shadows of what had almost taken his life, and the painful memories of how he'd failed. No, Ash Hollow felt different. It felt safe. Clara Monroe had been a constant presence since the night he had been pulled from the ravine. She was not just a rescue worker. She was a woman of strength who exuded a calm authority that made Noah feel as though nothing would hurt him again, not as long as she was around. Her patience with him was palpable, and when she wasn't attending to the dogs she had been training, she was always checking on him, making sure he was drinking enough water or that his legs weren't stiffening from too much time in bed. Shadow, of course, had never left Noah's side. The dog, despite the few scars he carried from years of service, was as gentle as a breeze around Noah. His amber eyes never wavered in their constant watch, and he had claimed a spot on the couch by the fire, where he lay with his head resting on Noah's feet. One afternoon, as Noah sat at the kitchen table nursing a mug of tea, Earl Whitmore entered the room carrying a toolbox. Earl had become something of a surrogate father to Noah since the night he had been found. The old man was gruff, his hands worn and calloused from years of work, but his eyes were kind. His gray beard had grown longer over the past few weeks, and his clothing was always practical thick flannel shirts and heavy boots, despite the warmth that was now filtering into the cabin. "Come on, Noah, get up," Earl said, his voice warm but firm. "Time for you to stop moping around. I've got something to show you." Noah looked up, confused but curious. "What's that?" Earl simply grinned and motioned for him to follow. Noah hesitated for a moment, then set down the cup and limped after the older man. Earl led him outside, where the fresh blanket of snow made the yard look pristine. At the edge of the property, just behind the cabin, Earl had built a small wooden shed, nothing grand but sturdy enough to house what Noah quickly realized was meant for him. "A little something for you," Earl said, holding the door open. Inside, the room was cozy, a small cot by the window, a space for him to read or work, and a warm wood stove that crackled in the corner. It was a room meant for peace, meant for recovery. "You don't need to go back to the city," Earl said, his voice softer now. "Stay here, Noah. You're family now." Noah stood at the threshold, his throat tight. He had always been a solitary man, but in this moment, surrounded by the quiet of Ash Hollow, he realized that maybe he didn't need to be alone anymore. The weight of the past few weeks, the fear, the pain, the loss had lightened just a little. Maybe, just maybe, this was where he could rebuild. Over the next few days, Noah started to feel more at home. He began helping Earl around the cabin, chopping wood, fixing small repairs. But what truly started to make him feel like he belonged was when Clara Monroe walked into the cabin one evening with a grin that spread across her face like a secret she couldn't keep any longer. "I've got something for you," she said, placing a set of training leashes on the table. Noah raised an eyebrow. "Training?" "Yes, indeed," she replied. "You're going to help me with the new dogs. I need an extra pair of hands, and Shadow can't be everywhere at once." Noah chuckled at the thought. Shadow was a constant presence, but he never asked for attention. "What do you need me to do?" Clara leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint. "I'm starting a new canine training program in the town hall's old warehouse. Dogs from all over the area need to be trained for search and rescue. I thought we could use the help of someone who knows how to work with animals." Noah nodded, a sense of purpose settling into his chest. He might not be able to return to active duty as a cop, but this was something he could contribute to, something he could help build. He looked down at Shadow, who was sitting at his feet, his eyes wide as if he, too, understood that this was the next chapter. "Let's do it," Noah said, a new fire igniting in him. "Let's give these dogs a new mission." The following weeks were filled with activity. Clara set up training sessions in the old warehouse on the outskirts of Ash Hollow. The space was large, with high ceilings and wooden beams, perfect for agility courses and mock search missions. Dogs of all breeds were brought in from nearby shelters, many had been abandoned, and some had been rescued from dire situations. Each one had its own story, its own scars. As for Shadow, he became the unofficial leader of the group. His years of experience were invaluable, and his calm presence gave the other dogs a sense of security. Noah found himself working alongside Clara more and more, learning the intricacies of search and rescue training, bonding with the dogs, and especially bonding with Shadow. And so, the three of them, Clara, Earl, and Noah, became a family of sorts. It wasn't the family Noah had imagined for himself, but it was the one he needed. There was love in the small moments, the laughter shared over the fire at night, the quiet exchanges between Noah and Clara as they worked side by side, and the unspoken bond between a man and his dog. Earl, who had been alone for so many years, often found himself looking at the small family they had created with a kind of quiet satisfaction. He had opened his doors to Noah, and in doing so had rekindled a warmth he hadn't felt in years. And above it all, the stars in the Ash Hollow sky twinkled silent witnesses to a new beginning for the family they had found in the cold. The morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling a pale golden light across the snowy expanse of Ash Hollow. Spring had not yet fully arrived, but the mountain air felt different, lighter, as if the earth were waking up from a long slumber. The ground was still frozen, but there was a hint of warmth in the sunlight, a promise of the thaw to come. The trees, still heavy with the weight of the season, creaked in the soft wind. Everything felt alive again, breathing in tandem with the slow turn of the world. Inside the cabin, Noah Carter sat by the fire, a mug of coffee cradled between his hands. His eyes, though tired, held a warmth that hadn't been there just a few months ago. The room was peaceful. No hurried footsteps, no alarms or frantic calls. Just the quiet hum of life, the quiet pulse of normalcy that Noah had come to cherish. He could hear the faint sound of paws on the wooden floor, the familiar steady rhythm of Shadow's movements. The German Shepherd had become something of a cornerstone for the small family they had built. He was always by Noah's side, watching, waiting, and, when necessary, pulling him back from the edge of his own thoughts. The dog had become more than just a companion. He had become Noah's anchor. That morning, however, something was different. Noah glanced up as he heard the soft scrape of claws on the floor. Shadow was standing near the door, his legs a little unsteady as if testing the ground. His dark amber eyes were locked on Noah, unwavering, full of intention. Shadow took a hesitant step forward, then another. He moved slowly, methodically, his posture cautious but determined. Noah's heart leapt into his throat. The dog was standing. The memory of the injury of the frozen night, of the wreckage under the bridge, flashed through Noah's mind. Shadow had been through so much, and so had he. The idea that Shadow might one day walk again had seemed impossible when they had first found him, lying stiff and broken from the cold. But here, in the quiet warmth of the cabin, Shadow was rising. Slowly but surely, he lifted his front paws, planted them firmly, and then, with visible effort, pushed against the floor with his back legs. It was a slow, painstaking motion, but it was real. Shadow was standing on his own, his legs shaking from the effort, his body swaying slightly as if testing its own strength. Noah stood up, the mug slipping from his hands onto the table, the clink of ceramic almost lost in the sound of his heartbeat. He moved toward the dog, cautious but thrilled, his breath catching in his throat. He reached out a hand, but Shadow's gaze held steady. The dog gave a low whine, his tail twitching weakly before he took another step stronger this time. "Look at you, boy," Noah whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "You're standing." A laugh bubbled up from Noah's chest, the first genuine laugh he'd had in weeks. It wasn't a loud laugh, nor a happy one exactly. It was the kind of laugh that came from the relief of seeing something impossible become real. Something that once seemed hopeless, now showing a flicker of life. Noah ran his fingers through Shadow's fur, scratching gently behind his ears, and the dog leaned into the touch, his eyes closing in contentment. For a few moments they simply stood there together, man and dog, in the quiet peace of the morning. Shadow wasn't just walking, he was reclaiming what he had lost, one hesitant step at a time. And for Noah, it felt as though he too were taking those steps with him, small, tentative, but moving forward nonetheless. Later that afternoon, Clara arrived to check on Noah. She entered the cabin with her usual bright smile, but there was a glint in her eyes when she saw Shadow standing. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked, her voice soft with disbelief. Noah nodded, still standing by the door where Shadow had slowly, carefully made his way. "He's standing." "He's actually standing," Clara chuckled, wiping a hand over her eyes. "That's a sight, isn't it?" "No kidding," Noah said, a grin spreading across his face. "He's been moving slow, but he's finally showing us he's still got it." "I knew he could do it." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You both did. It's not just Shadow coming back, Noah. It's you too." Noah swallowed, his heart pounding. He had heard her say those words before, but now they had meaning he hadn't fully understood until that moment. It was true. He had come a long way, not just in body, but in spirit. And he owed it in part to Shadow. The next week, Noah began working more closely with Clara. He had started to help with the canine rescue training in the old warehouse on the outskirts of Ash Hollow. Clara's program had been growing steadily since the winter. More dogs' rescues from shelters, abandoned animals, or ones with traumatic backgrounds were brought in to be trained for search and rescue operations. At first, Noah simply observed, learning the methods that Clara used to train dogs for recovery missions. But soon, Shadow became more than just a symbol of hope for the dogs. As one of the most experienced search dogs, Shadow became the figurehead of Clara's program. He was both a teacher and a student, showing the other dogs how to focus, how to work together, and how to listen for the commands they'd need to save lives. Shadow also began participating in therapy for children with emotional and psychological trauma. In the quiet, warm afternoons that followed, Noah would accompany Clara to the local community center, where Shadow would lay beside children who had lost their own sense of safety, children who, like Noah, needed something to hold on to. Shadow, with his steady presence and gentle nature, became their silent guardian. His calm demeanor soothed their fears, and soon they began to trust him as much as he trusted them. Over time, Shadow's rehabilitation became more than just about walking again. It was about the power of healing, both for the dog and for the people around him. And through it all, Noah was there, watching Shadow's steady growth, his own healing intertwined with that of his dog. Noah had never thought of himself as someone who would lead others, but as he worked alongside Clara in training the dogs and helping the children, he realized that maybe this was the family he had needed all along. And when evening fell and the stars twinkled above the ridge, it was clear that both Shadow and Noah had come to find a new purpose in each other's company. They weren't just recovering, they were moving forward together. The warm summer sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows over the grounds of the small schoolhouse in Ash Hollow. It had been a few months since the events beneath the bridge, and though the scars of that night were still fresh in Noah's mind, the town had begun to heal. The community had come together in a way Noah hadn't seen in years, families and strangers alike, all united by something far bigger than themselves. Today was the town's annual summer celebration, A day of games, music, and laughter that brought the entire town out into the open air. But for Noah, it was more than just a festival. It was the day he would tell his story. The story that had saved him. The story of how a dog named Shadow had pulled him from the jaws of death, not once, but twice. Noah stood at the front of the gathered children, their eyes wide and filled with curiosity as he spoke. He had been invited to speak at the school assembly, something he hadn't expected but had come to appreciate. The kids had followed the news of his recovery closely, and they were eager to hear the man they had seen as a hero tell his tale in person. "Many of you know my story," Noah began, his voice steady but soft. "The story of how I was found, cold and broken, beneath a bridge in the middle of nowhere. How I almost didn't make it." The children sat in rapt attention, hanging on every word. "But what you might not know," Noah continued, "is that I didn't make it alone. There was a dog, one of the bravest, most loyal creatures I've ever met. His name is Shadow." As he spoke, Shadow, now standing proudly by his side, wagged his tail slowly, as if knowing that this moment was as much for him as it was for Noah. The dog had become something of a legend in Ash Hollow. Not just a hero, but a symbol of perseverance, loyalty, and the bond between humans and animals. Shadow was no longer just Noah's companion. He had become Hero of the Hollow, an honorary title that the town had bestowed upon him during a ceremony just days earlier. Shadow wore the recognition with quiet grace, his amber eyes soft but full of understanding, as though he knew how much he meant to the people who had watched him rise from the wreckage of his past. Noah paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle into the young minds before him. He looked out over the kids, his heart swelling with pride. "Shadow didn't just save me. He saved the town in ways that you'll never fully understand. He showed me that we don't have to be alone, no matter how bad things get." He turned to the dog, who was now sitting attentively at his feet. "Shadow, come here." The dog rose and walked confidently toward Noah, who knelt down to hug him, the weight of their shared history pressing between them. The children gasped, some even clapping, amazed by the bond between man and animal. Noah straightened and turned to face the assembly once more. He pulled something from his pocket, a small silver medallion. It glinted in the sunlight, engraved with the words, "Hero of the Hollow," beneath a silhouette of a dog and a man. "This medal," Noah said, holding it up, "is not just for Shadow. It's for all of us, for the family we found in each other, for the lessons we've learned about loyalty, strength, and the willingness to fight when everything seems lost." The crowd cheered as Noah placed the medal around Shadow's neck, fastening it gently before giving him one last affectionate pat. The dog's tail wagged again, his eyes bright with the recognition. But the celebration was far from over. As Noah and Shadow stepped down from the stage, a young boy in the crowd caught his eye. The boy, around 9 years old, sat still, his head bowed. His face was streaked with dirt, and his clothes were patched in places as if he hadn't been cared for properly in a long time. His eyes, however, were filled with something else, something Noah recognized. Pain. The boy's hands clenched into fists on his lap and his lips trembled slightly. Noah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted nervously around the crowd. He wasn't here for the fun. He wasn't here for the celebration. He was here because someone had made him. Noah's heart went out to him. He could tell something was wrong. He motioned to Shadow, who seemed to understand, and walked over to the boy without hesitation. Shadow's gait was steady and confident, but his movements were slow, deliberate, as if he knew he was about to make a difference in someone's life. The boy looked up just as Shadow reached his side, and the dog lowered his head, gently placing it on the boy's knee. The touch was light, but it was enough. Enough to break the dam that had been holding back the flood of grief. The boy's lips quivered before a single tear slid down his cheek. He sniffed once, then again, and before long the floodgates opened. He threw his arms around Shadow's neck, his small body shaking with sobs. Shadow, unflinching, pressed into the boy, resting his head against his chest. Noah stood at a distance watching the scene unfold. He recognized the pain in the boy's eyes, the kind of pain that came from loss, from never truly healing. The kind of pain that he, too, had carried not long ago. The boy finally pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. He looked at Shadow, his expression softer now, and whispered, "Thank you." Noah approached slowly, kneeling beside him. "You okay?" he asked gently. The boy nodded, though his face was still streaked with tears. "I miss my dad," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to feel better." "I know," Noah said, his voice soft with understanding. "It's hard, but you don't have to do it alone." The boy sniffled again and nodded. "I think Shadow's gonna help me." Noah smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I think so, too." From that moment on, Shadow became more than just a symbol of survival. He became a healer, a comfort, a lifeline. And as the boy stood up, wiping his eyes, Shadow remained by his side, a quiet promise of support, of understanding. As the day wore on and the festivities continued around them, Noah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The mission wasn't over. It had just begun. There were still people to heal, wounds to mend, and lives to touch. The mission continued, and Shadow, with Noah by his side, would be there to help see it through. As we come to the end of this journey, we are reminded of the power of love, loyalty, and healing. In the darkest moments when we feel abandoned, lost, or broken, there is always a light that guides us, sometimes in the form of an unexpected companion, sometimes in the kindness of a stranger, and sometimes in a miracle that brings us back from the edge. Shadow's story is more than just the tale of a dog and his human. It's a testament to the resilience of the spirit, to the unseen forces that work when we least expect them. It's a reminder that in life, when we feel like we are falling, there is something higher, something divine that catches us, even when we can't see it. It's as if the hand of God reaches down, offering comfort, strength, and hope when all seems lost. In our own lives, we may not always see the miracles unfold in the way we expect. Sometimes they are small whispers of hope in a quiet moment, a sudden change in direction, a shift in our hearts. But these miracles are real. They happen every day. So, take a moment today to reflect on the blessings you have. Remember, there is always light even in the darkest of places, and we are never truly alone. Share your story, share your heart, and keep faith in the journey that lies ahead. If you believe in the power of love, of loyalty, and the miracles that surround us every day, I encourage you to share this story. Comment below with Amen if you've been touched by the power of kindness, and if this story has reminded you that hope is always within reach. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another tale of courage and faith. May God bless you and keep you.